because they saw what happened with us. And so all of a sudden, you know, they started showing up. They all had singers with long blonde hair. My name is Michael Anthony.
For over 4 decades, Van Halen ruled the rock world with explosive guitar riffs, thunderous drums, and electrifying stage presence that defined a generation. But behind the spotlight and the platinum albums, one man quietly held it all together: Michael Anthony, the bassist whose steady rhythm and soaring harmonies became the backbone of their legendary sound. At 70, Anthony is finally ready to share the complete truth about his time with one of rock's most iconic bands. This isn't just another story about creative differences or backstage drama. It's the untold account of loyalty tested, contributions dismissed, and a betrayal so profound that Anthony discovered his own replacement not through a phone call from his bandmates, but by reading about it on the internet. The man who provided the low-end foundation for classics like Runnin' with the Devil and Jump has remained remarkably diplomatic over the years, even as his role was systematically diminished and his legacy questioned. But the full story reveals how one of rock's most dependable musicians was quietly pushed aside by the very people he helped make famous. What Anthony has revealed about Eddie Van Halen and the inner workings of the band might forever change how you hear those legendary songs. Michael Anthony's journey to rock stardom began in a household filled with music, though not the kind that would eventually make him famous. His father, Walter Sobolewski, was a trumpet player whose musical influence shaped young Michael's early understanding of rhythm and melody. Growing up in Southern California during the 1960s, Anthony first followed his father's footsteps by learning trumpet, participating in his school's marching band at Dana Junior High School in Arcadia. But at 13, something shifted. While his friends gravitated toward guitar and drums, Anthony chose a different path: the bass guitar. His decision wasn't born from any grand musical vision, but simply from a desire to stand out from the crowd. A friend loaned him a Fender Mustang guitar, which Anthony converted into a makeshift bass by removing 2 strings. This humble beginning marked the start of what would become one of rock's most recognizable rhythm sections. Anthony's father, recognizing his son's growing dedication, invested in proper equipment: a Fender Precision bass copy and a Gibson amplifier. This support allowed Anthony to develop his skills seriously, drawing inspiration from bass legends like Jack Bruce of Cream, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, and Harvey Brooks of Electric Flag. Despite being naturally left-handed, Anthony taught himself to play right-handed, demonstrating the adaptability that would serve him well throughout his career. By the early 1970s, Anthony had joined a local power trio called Snake, where he handled both bass duties and lead vocals. The band played the Southern California club circuit, performing covers and original material at school dances and local venues throughout the Pasadena and Arcadia areas. It was honest, hard work that taught Anthony the fundamentals of live performance and stage presence. Little did he know that this local band experience was preparing him for something much bigger. The meeting that would change rock history happened almost by accident. Snake and another local band called Mammoth often played the same venues in the San Gabriel Valley music scene. Mammoth featured 2 Dutch-American brothers, Alex and Eddie Van Halen, who were already making waves with their explosive sound and Eddie's innovative guitar techniques. During one particular show at Pasadena High School, where Snake was opening for Mammoth, fate intervened. Mammoth's public address system malfunctioned just before their set, threatening to derail the entire performance. Without hesitation, Anthony offered to let them use Snake's equipment so the show could continue. This simple act of professional courtesy and generosity left a lasting impression on the Van Halen brothers. The timing couldn't have been better. Mammoth was facing their own crossroads, having recently lost their bassist Mark Stone. The brothers remembered Anthony's helpful gesture and his energetic stage presence, so they invited him to a garage jam session to test the musical chemistry. The connection was immediate and undeniable. Anthony's powerful bass playing and distinctive high-pitched backing vocals added exactly what the Van Halen brothers had been searching for. The musical partnership clicked so perfectly that Anthony was quickly invited to join the band permanently. Shortly after his arrival, the group faced another change. They discovered another band was already using the name Mammoth, forcing them to rebrand. The new name they chose would become legendary: Van Halen. With David Lee Roth on vocals, Eddie on guitar, Alex on drums, and Anthony on bass, the classic lineup was complete. This wasn't just a band change for Anthony. It was a launching pad into a career that would define arena rock for decades. The four-piece combination created a chemistry that was both musically tight and explosively entertaining, setting the stage for what would become one of the most successful rock bands of all time. With the classic Van Halen lineup solidified in the mid-1970s, the band quickly established itself as a force on the Los Angeles club circuit. Venues like Gazzari's and the Whiskey A Go-Go became regular stops, where Anthony's onstage energy and signature vocal harmonies helped distinguish Van Halen from countless other hard rock bands competing for attention. Anthony's high-pitched backing vocals became an integral part of the Van Halen sound, providing the perfect complement to David Lee Roth's lead vocals. This vocal interplay, combined with Anthony's steady, no-frills bass playing, created the rhythmic foundation that allowed Eddie Van Halen's revolutionary guitar work and Alex's thunderous drumming to soar. The chemistry was undeniable, and audiences responded with growing enthusiasm. When Van Halen released their debut album in 1978 under Warner Brothers Records, Anthony's contributions were prominently featured throughout. His bass lines anchored explosive tracks like Runnin' with the Devil and Ain't Talkin' 'Bout Love, while his background vocals elevated anthems like Jamie's Cryin' and Feel Your Love Tonight. The album became a commercial breakthrough, and critics consistently praised the tight rhythm section that allowed the band's more flamboyant elements to shine. During these early years, Anthony was treated as a full and equal member of the band. According to former manager Noel Monk, Anthony received an equal 20% share of the band's revenues and was included in major business decisions. He participated fully in the creative process and shared equally in both the financial rewards and responsibilities that came with Van Halen's rapidly growing success. The band's popularity exploded throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, with Anthony maintaining a consistent, professional presence both on stage and in the studio. While Eddie dazzled audiences with his guitar innovations and Roth commanded attention with his theatrical stage presence, Anthony became known as the dependable foundation, the steady heartbeat that kept the band grounded amid the chaos of rock stardom. His contributions to albums like Fair Warning and Diver Down continued to demonstrate his importance to the band's musical identity. By 1984, Van Halen had reached the pinnacle of commercial success. Their album 1984 featured massive hits like Jump, Panama, and Hot for Teacher, establishing them as one of the world's most popular rock bands. But behind the scenes, a devastating betrayal was about to unfold that would forever alter Michael Anthony's relationship with the band he had helped build. According to former manager Noel Monk, it was during the 1984 tour that Anthony faced one of the most shocking moments of his career. Just hours before a concert, the other three members, Eddie and Alex Van Halen, along with David Lee Roth, presented Anthony with a contract backstage. The document was life-changing. It stripped Anthony of all future songwriting credits and royalties, effectively demoting him from an equal partner to a hired musician. The circumstances were deliberately intimidating. Monk revealed in his memoir, Runnin' with the Devil, that all three bandmates stood over Anthony as he was pressured to sign the agreement. The contract was retroactive, meaning Anthony also forfeited his rights to the 1984 album itself, despite his musical and vocal contributions to what would become one of their most successful releases. The timing, just before a show, left Anthony with little choice but to sign or risk jeopardizing the entire tour. Monk later stated that he would have advised against signing if he had known about the contract in advance, but the deed was done. Anthony went through with it, reportedly to avoid confrontation and keep the tour moving forward. The decision would haunt him for decades to come. The financial consequences were staggering. The 1984 album went on to sell over 10 million copies in the United States alone, generating millions in royalties that Anthony would never see. Future licensing deals, greatest hits compilations, and reissues would continue to generate revenue from songs he had helped create. But his signature on that backstage contract had signed away his right to participate in those profits. For years, Anthony maintained his professionalism and kept quiet about the incident. Only in later interviews would he confirm that he had signed away his rights under duress, explaining that his primary concern had been preserving the band he loved. The 1984 contract controversy became a stark example of how even founding members of legendary bands could find themselves powerless when faced with internal politics and pressure. As the years passed, Michael Anthony began experiencing a troubling shift in how his contributions were publicly acknowledged, particularly by Eddie Van Halen. Despite decades of solid performances and being a key component of the band's signature sound, Eddie started making comments in interviews that seemed designed to diminish Anthony's role and abilities. The most controversial statements came during Eddie's 2015 interview with Billboard, where he made shocking claims about Anthony's musical competence. Eddie alleged that he had to show Anthony how to play every note and accused him of lacking the initiative expected of a professional bassist. These comments sent shockwaves through the rock community, with fans and fellow musicians immediately pushing back against what many saw as unfair and historically inaccurate characterizations. Anthony responded to these claims with dignity and factual clarity. In subsequent interviews, he firmly stated that Eddie's criticisms were completely unfounded. Anthony maintained that he had always learned the band's material independently, and that there had never been any sessions where Eddie needed to teach him what to play. He pointed out that if such moments had actually occurred, they would have been documented, but no evidence of these alleged coaching sessions existed. The personal impact of Eddie's public criticism went far beyond professional disagreement. Anthony described the experience as emotionally devastating, particularly because it came from someone he had known and worked with for decades. The comments felt like a betrayal of their long history together, especially considering Anthony's unwavering loyalty to the band through numerous internal conflicts and lineup changes. These public statements also temporarily damaged Anthony's professional reputation among newer fans who might question his abilities based on Eddie's words, despite his decades of credible performances and praise from fellow musicians. The criticism created an uncomfortable public narrative that forced Anthony to defend contributions that had been universally respected for years. Anthony chose not to engage in a public war of words, but he acknowledged that the growing distance between him and Eddie contributed to the deterioration of their relationship. By the mid-2000s, their communication had virtually ceased, and Anthony found himself increasingly isolated within the band's operations. After Eddie's death in 2020, Anthony expressed genuine regret that they never had the opportunity to resolve their differences and find closure to their decades-long partnership. By the late 1990s, Michael Anthony's role within Van Halen began diminishing in ways that weren't immediately obvious to the public. During the recording of the 1998 album, Van Halen 3, Anthony played bass on only 3 of the 11 tracks. Eddie Van Halen handled bass duties on the remaining songs, signaling a significant shift in the band's internal dynamics. While Anthony still appeared in promotional materials and toured with the band, his reduced studio participation raised serious questions about his standing within the group. The marginalization continued throughout the 2000s. When the band released the Best of Both Worlds compilation in 2004, Anthony didn't perform on any of the 3 new tracks featured on the record. His only contribution was backing vocals. These exclusions weren't accidents or creative decisions. They were part of a systematic reduction of Anthony's involvement in the band's core operations. Anthony's final tour with Van Halen came during the highly publicized reunion with Sammy Hagar in 2004. But even this reunion came with conditions that highlighted his changed status. According to Hagar, Anthony was offered reduced financial compensation and a contract that treated him like a hired musician rather than a founding member. Despite the tour's commercial success, it failed to restore Anthony's position within the band's hierarchy. The most painful aspect of Anthony's departure was how it unfolded. In 2006, Eddie Van Halen decided to replace Anthony with his teenage son, Wolfgang Van Halen. However, Anthony wasn't informed of this decision through any official communication from the band. Instead, he learned about his replacement through online rumors and fan speculation. The lack of even a basic phone call to inform him of this major change added insult to injury. Following his departure from Van Halen, Michael Anthony found new creative energy through collaborations with former Van Halen frontman Sammy Hagar. Their musical chemistry became the foundation for several successful projects that proved Anthony's talents were far from diminished. The most successful venture has been Chickenfoot, formed in 2008 with Hagar, guitar virtuoso Joe Satriani, and Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Chad Smith. Their 2009 debut album was both a critical and commercial success, debuting in the top 10 of the Billboard 200. The band's tight musicianship and Anthony's continued excellence on bass and vocals proved that he remained a vital creative force in rock music. In 2014, Anthony joined Sammy Hagar and The Circle, featuring guitarist Vic Johnson and drummer Jason Bonham. Their 2019 album Space Between reached number 4 on the Billboard 200, demonstrating Anthony's continued relevance and enduring appeal to rock audiences. These collaborations allowed Anthony to work with musicians who valued his contributions, a stark contrast to his final years with Van Halen. Following Eddie Van Halen's death in October 2020, there was renewed interest in organizing a tribute tour to honor the guitarist's legacy. Discussions gained momentum in 2021 and 2022, with drummer Alex Van Halen reportedly reaching out to former members, including Michael Anthony and guitar virtuoso Joe Satriani. However, the reunion plans collapsed due to internal disagreements. One primary obstacle reportedly involved David Lee Roth, who allegedly resisted participating in the tribute format that others envisioned. The situation became more complicated when Alex Van Halen suffered a back injury in 2022, making it unlikely he could handle the physical demands of touring. Anthony later confirmed he had been contacted about the tribute and had shown genuine interest in participating. The opportunity represented a chance for closure and a final celebration of the music that had defined so much of his life. However, the emotional and logistical barriers proved too significant to overcome, and the tribute tour was quietly abandoned. For Anthony, it meant his complex relationship with the Van Halen legacy would remain unresolved. Valerie Bertinelli, actress and Eddie Van Halen's ex-wife, has taken a strong stance against any biopic about the legendary guitarist, at least during her lifetime. In a 2023 interview, Bertinelli revealed she had told her son, Wolfgang Van Halen, to make sure I'm dead before allowing such a film to be made. Her concerns center on protecting Eddie's memory from Hollywood sensationalism. This protective stance reflects the family's broader approach to managing Eddie's legacy. Wolfgang Van Halen has become vocal about toxic fan culture, particularly fans who demand reunions without considering the emotional realities facing surviving family members. Wolfgang has confirmed the existence of unreleased Van Halen recordings, but emphasized that any decisions would be made carefully with the family's blessing. Wolfgang continues forging his own musical path with Mammoth WVH, demonstrating that the Van Halen musical legacy continues through genuine artistic expression rather than nostalgia-driven projects. The story of Michael Anthony and Van Halen is ultimately about loyalty, creative partnership, and the human cost of extraordinary success. For nearly 3 decades, Anthony provided the steady foundation that allowed one of rock's most explosive bands to soar, but his contributions were gradually diminished until he found himself erased from the very legacy he had helped create. Anthony's experience reveals how business pressures and personal conflicts can override decades of friendship and collaboration. The 1984 contract that stripped him of his rights, Eddie's public criticism, and his replacement without even a phone call all demonstrate the complex dynamics that can tear apart even the most successful musical partnerships. Yet throughout these betrayals, Anthony maintained his professionalism and dignity. The irony is that Anthony's departure from Van Halen ultimately led to some of his most fulfilling musical experiences. His collaborations with Sammy Hagar, Joe Satriani, and others in projects like Chickenfoot proved that his talents were far from diminished. They had simply been undervalued by the people who should have appreciated them most. At 70, Michael Anthony's legacy extends far beyond his bass playing or vocal harmonies. He represents the often overlooked musicians who provide the foundation for rock's biggest stars, the dependable professionals who show up, do the work, and keep the music moving forward even when they don't receive equal recognition. The Van Halen that fans remember was built on Anthony's steady rhythm and soaring harmonies just as much as Eddie's revolutionary guitar work. That foundation may have been taken for granted, but it was never truly replaceable.